Dear Steve, and we're live. Episode
Right.
3. Welcome, welcome. So, thanks everybody for joining. If you're watching us live on Twitch, we greatly appreciate you. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, you're more than welcome to join us in the chat. You can also join our Discord. The link is down underneath the Twitch stream as well as on all of the uploads that you find on the internet. So, if you're watching the video on YouTube or if you're listening to the audio on Spotify or Anchor or another Apple podcast, something like that, there should be a link associated there for our Discord server. And as we do these podcasts, you're more than welcome to jump in. If you have a comment, you can join our live lobby channel. We'll pull you up in our segment when we ask for questions or comments, and then you're free to hop in and say what you want to say. So today is going to be a great episode. This is something I wanted to do before we even started this podcast. This episode, we're going to talk about mental health as it relates to first responders. And with us is another Stephen, which is pretty awesome. Stephen Hough. He's from Blue H.E.L.P. And Stephen, if you want to introduce yourself.
So, all right. Hey guys, I'm Steve Hough. I am a co-founder of Blue H.E.L.P. I've been in law enforcement now for right at 23 and a half years. So I've got about another year and a half to go before I retire. I'm an inspector with the Walton County Sheriff's Office, and it's a pleasure to be here.
And before we go further, do you want to talk to us and tell us a little bit about what Blue H.E.L.P. is?
Sure. Blue Help actually came about back it was actually before 2015. It really started to take hold when my partner and I were involved in a shooting where I got shot 3 or 4 times. I got shot once in the face, a couple of times in the leg. Shortly after that, we started to see the effects, not only what the shooting did to myself, but what it did to him and what it did to other officers, other family members, and community members. I mean, the reach was far and wide. From there, Jeff and I, we were fortunate enough to get introduced to Karen Solomon, who at the time was a blogger and she also was an author. She had written a couple of books. Jeff and her wrote a book called The Price They Pay, which really outlined a lot of the stories, brought it to the forefront of what our officers are going through, our first responders are going through every day. Shortly after that, that's when Blue Help evolved. We came about with the mission of filling that void where number one, dealing with the mental health stigma, and number two, we're losing a lot of officers to suicide, and that was something that just wasn't being talked about, and it still isn't really being talked about. You know, that stigma and the machismo behind being a type A personality and a first responder. You know, we saw a need to come forward with that and make awareness and get people talking about this stigma of dealing and talking about mental health. And that's really what Blue Help is all about. I know we kind of niched ourselves for law enforcement corrections officers, but really we have talked with other first responders. We've talked with firefighters. We've talked with military veterans. There's we don't necessarily delineate between that. Now we do just track data on law enforcement suicides. However, we're there to help everybody.
Awesome. Sounds good. I was looking at your website, so I did see some statistics for it to cover. Talking about that stigma, I've seen it before. A lot of guys struggle and they just don't go get help because they're big tough guys or ladies, and obviously they don't want to feel like speaking, getting their emotions out, and feeling weak, right? So I
Absolutely.
I put a poll out. Just 45 people replied to it, but 77% said that they've struggled with something with mental health and they did not seek help. And I thought that was pretty powerful. 77% of those people. I imagine that's probably realistic if you were to
Oh yeah.
poll, a stronger number, bigger audience.
Absolutely. And let's keep in mind that the majority of our first responders, like we had already said, are those type A personalities. We are the ones that get called to help people. deal with in their time of need. So for us to step back and and go, hey, look, we need help. It's very hard to do that. It's very hard to go from the one being in control to the one not being in control and actually needing that help. So a lot of our first responders, our guys and gals out there, they are able to overcome some of those concerns that they have with their own mental health, whether it be through physical fitness, whether it be through religion, um, uh, yoga. I mean, there's so many different things, so many different programs now that are popping up that we see that are dedicated to helping law enforcement, shake that stuff off so they can get rid of it and get back to themselves and build up that resiliency to the things that they deal with on a daily basis.
Right.
Uh,
And sometimes it could be something small, and sometimes it could be something big, the shooting,
Right.
or it could be, just they go to a call and they see a kid that got hit with a belt, and something clicks somewhere. And, it's not that they're weak. It's not that they're less of a person. It's just, it affects people different ways.
Absolutely. I tell everybody all the time, just like we're going to talk about shortly, we're going to talk about the shooting that I was involved in, as well as some other examples. But, that's a single incident. And you take that on top of, at the time, it was a 10, 15-year career, all the other things that I've seen prior to that and dealt with that, that accumulative stress. Um, that accumulative stress is just as bad as, if not worse, as that a single traumatic incident. When you have that single traumatic incident, if steps are taken immediately, we can kind of work around some of the concerns of mental health by just getting these guys into debriefing settings, or just getting them in with a set of peers and sitting down and talking about it, and that does wonders. But when you deal with these things over a 20-25 year career, it goes right back to that rock in the backpack analogy, right? It only takes that one rock that drops you to your knees and you can't move forward. So
I
these
like
are things go ahead.
I was gonna say, I like the bucket, the kind of the water in the bucket. Every
You got
single
it.
thing you run into, it slowly starts to fill up, and eventually it just overflows the
You
bucket, and
got it.
you have to empty that bucket out every once in a while.
Amen. And that's exactly and that's exactly what we're after. That's exactly what Blue Help is after. Blue Help is after getting these guys and gals in to help them empty that bucket, and or at least understand how to deal with when that bucket gets kind of full, how to deal with that so they can bounce back and come back and be the first responder they want to be, as well as be the husband or wife or family member that they once were, because we all know that it affects more than just ourselves. It affects more than just the other officers on the street. It comes right back to the family, the friends, and even people you don't know.
Absolutely. Kilo, Stephen, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was gonna say, first responders, they're so busy. They do these long shifts, and just the shifts are very straining on the body, on the mind. And then on top of that, they go through things, they see things, and then they go back home and they have to square themselves away because they got to be the leader of their family. They got kids that are playing ball and they just stay so busy. And I think sometimes they believe like they don't have time. They can't go talk to somebody. They got so much stuff to do. Especially
That's
now, in 2020, there's so much stuff to do that takes away your time and sucks away your time from everything.
and Stephen. Do you prefer Steve or Steven, by the way?
Steven works.
Okay. Yeah, I prefer Steven as well because now I'm older and I'm astute. Before I used to prefer Steve. So Steven, you hit the nail on the head though. During our shooting, right immediately after our shooting, one of the guys, one of my close friends, he had already had a trip planned with his family, so he had to leave while I was in the hospital. So one of the things that I want to make sure that the listeners understand, or the viewers understand, is that, hey, we put our pants on the same way you do, one leg at a time. We're only supermen when we're in our Superman outfit. We get done dealing with the things we deal with on the road, and then we come home, and it's like a switch almost has to be flipped, right? Where we come home and then we have to put that away and then come back in and sit down and have dinner and how was your day, and you can't exactly talk about the mom that uh, killed her kid, or the families that's dealing with grief of a family member being addicted to drugs, or any number, you name it, any number of 100 different things that we could deal with during a day, and then we got to come home and turn it all off and be the family person. So that's a big thing, that we've got to be able to just let that go at some point in time. We need a little bit of time to just decompress and let that empty that bucket, and then everything is right, and sometimes it can be very, very difficult to delineate between those two. Sometimes the work blurs over into home, and that's what we want to stay away from.
Well, and me personally, I worked for a large department of over 1,000 officers, and for my first 12 years, and it was a lot of go to work, come home, go to sleep, go to work, go to court, go to work, home, go to off duty, do all this stuff, and
You
I
got
didn't,
it.
it just the bucket just fills and fills and fills, and there's really no. There's always an opportunity. You got to be able to find that opportunity to let that stuff out, but
Yep.
your brain is telling you I don't have time for that nonsense. I've got to keep going on because I'm the tough guy, I'm the strong guy. But I think it's really important that everybody understands that you have to make time for yourself.
Indeed.
Dude.
Yes.
So talking about a couple kind of instances, one myself and one for Stephen Kilo. He wanted to tell his story, and I'm going to tell mine as well, and then we're going to talk about some statistics and things like that. So, Kilo, Stephen, if you want to go ahead and tell us about your incident and how it's affected you, and you brought it up just the other day talking about it, like it bothered you, and it happened many years ago, and so if you want to kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
For sure. I mean, I've been out of the Army since 2012. This probably happened around 2010, maybe 2011. What I think is interesting is I'm a Iraqi vet. I've been deployed to two different countries, one being Iraq and then stationed in Korea. So I've seen the world a little bit. Definitely had some struggles in Iraq, but the this story is not a war story. It's not my war story. This happened, a normal call, dispatch called on post. So the story is from home. So to me, it's a little different, and I picked this story because when people think of trauma, they think of like gore and you've really seen something, and not how certain things can really mess with your mind and your emotions. So it was about 1:30 a.m. Extremely dark. I was working and obviously the night shift, and it was pouring down rain. And dispatch called us and said, "Hey, I need you to respond to this call." They didn't really have a whole lot of information. The guy that was on the phone was kind of, I wouldn't say talking gibberish, but he was just really shooken up. And so we'll call him Sergeant just to keep names anonymous. So I received the call. Me and a fellow officer make it to the call, and we see this guy in the middle of the road. He's just like waving us down in the middle of the street. And so he waves us down, and we stop, and he begins to tell us, "Look, I have a soldier. He's in this ditch. And now this ditch is probably 10 feet deep, and it has these humongous rocks that just cover the whole ditch." And he says, "Look, this is what happened. He's extremely intoxicated, and we just got back from a deployment, literally a few days before. And he is not in his right mind. So we walk over, we try to talk to him, and this is what really one of the things that shakes me up. We go over to this ditch and look down, and we're talking to the guy. Hey, guy, you know, what are you doing, man? Why are you in the ditch? You know, come on out of the ditch. You know, you don't need to be down there. You know, it's just get you some help, buddy. And his sergeant and us, we were just talking super calm, and this is what his response was. He said, Sergeant, they're here. They're here to take me away. So he obviously had some extreme flashback PTSD stuff going on. It took a while. Pouring down rain. At first, I didn't even want to get out of my patrol car. I mean, I was almost a little bit agitated that I had to get out in the rain and work. Rain is not really my favorite thing. So we talked him out of the ditch. We called EMS, obviously. They're already on scene by this point, and we start walking him, trying to calm him down, walking him to get some medical help. I mean, he was like crawling around in this thing, scratches all over his arms, and he actually broke away and started sprinting and literally jumped back into the ditch about 10 feet, started crawling around yelling, they're trying to take me away, they're trying to take me away. So me and the sergeant, we walked about halfway down into this ditch, and somehow, and I don't understand how, because we couldn't go down and forcibly pull him out. It was extremely too dangerous. Like, it was super steep. There's no way we're going to wrestle this guy up. We have to talk him up. So we talked him back up somehow. Seemed like forever. We get him about 20 feet away from the ditch. He seems to be doing okay, and he turns around to run back. And this is the point where I had to react. Um, I've been on multiple calls, never really had to use any kind of force, even though I was an MP for a good 2-3 years at this point. So I was thinking in my head, man, I got to react to this. This guy can't jump back in there. He's gonna hurt himself extremely bad. So I pull out my taser and I tase him. And at first I thought, man, I kind of feel regret for tasing this guy. I mean, he's a soldier. He's one of my people. Like, he went downrange. Like, I understand what he's going through. But yeah, I had to raise my level of force for why. And so I thought about this for a while, and I actually talked to my wife about it. And I felt guilty for tasing a good guy. Tasers are for bad guys, right? So I felt bad for tasing a good guy, and I came to the conclusion I felt guilty at first, and I came to realize that I shouldn't. I'm okay with it. I had to do that. It was for his safety. His safety is the reason that I pulled the trigger on that taser. Not because he was a bad guy. It wasn't my safety. And when I said earlier, this war that he's not warring against me. He's not fighting against me. He's not fighting against the sergeant. He was fighting against the past. The past is what was doing the most damage at this point, and fighting against himself. Eventually, as I tased him, another officer came, hooked him up. We got him in the ambulance. We followed him down to the hospital, and he ended up being okay. He had a couple lacerations, obviously, from jumping in the ditch. Um, Thankfully, nothing, to the head. I mean, he was extremely lucky. He didn't hurt himself a lot. And I want to point out that there was nothing crazy. There was no shooting. There was no nothing. And I didn't really realize it until a couple years later that I kept thinking about this incident. Out of all the things that I've seen, out of all the war stuff that I've been through, that was my people. That was the good guy. And so for some reason it just tugged on me, and it was just I got to the point where I didn't blame myself for tasing him, but I still felt that heavy. It still was on my conscience that I had to do something. And it might have a lot to do with that was my first experience with doing anything like that. Luckily, through my law enforcement career, through being an MP, I never had to pull my weapon and pull the trigger. So for me, that was big.
And you and I
And
talked about it since, like I heard the story the first time. And did you go get help? Did you talk to anybody? Did you do anything just for the viewers and
so
listeners?
I didn't. Um, I've actually received little help, and I kind of want to talk to you about that too, because this podcast is awesome for me. And people think, oh man, Steven, you don't talk to anybody. This is me talking to you. I'm talking to viewers. I talk to my wife. I have a super great support system. My friends, my family, even the coworkers that I have now. But yet, still, after all these years, since 2012, since 2010, it's 2020. It's been almost 10 years ago, and I still keep all of these things that I still haven't talked to anybody about this day, just locked inside, and like it weighs on me like heavy. And so, the farther I get away from that, the farther I you know, get away from the military and just become a normal citizen, the more I've realized that talking helps. I've talked to my wife, I've talked to fellow veterans, I've talked to some coworkers, and sometimes just telling the story helps me a ton. Um, I want to encourage people, don't be like me. It's not it's not the right answer. Um, I mean, there's folks out there that help. I mean, even the army. Even I've seen, especially in the army, the suicide rate is just out of control. They do training and they have help all over the place. But even still, for some reason, folks just won't pull the trigger, like myself. So
I think the statistic nowadays is 22 veterans a day for suicide, and I mean
Yep.
it's just too much. It's too much, and it could be something
it's way too
small. It could
much.
be a guy driving down the road, he crashes, and he just felt awful about that, and it was so traumatic. Or it could be something where he shot up a car because it was coming through a checkpoint and it ended up being a lady and some kids. I mean, something extreme on the other end, right? And so in your case, this was not a shooting, not a explosion. There wasn't a lot of carnage or anything like that, but it vastly affected you on a personal level. And Stephen, Huff, I imagine this is something you see or hear a lot, is even the small stuff can make an impact.
Absolutely. And the one thing I'd want to say with Stephen is that that was that final of all the things you have possibly could have seen overseas, and I couldn't even fathom that. That was the last one. That was that last drop in the bucket that just finally made that bucket start overflowing. And I mean, I've been to calls where I've had to actually go in and officers have their guns broken down, and they're like, hey, look, I just, I need some help. Right. And they finally get to that point where it's just too much. And again, Stephen brought up a couple of good points. Pardon me. He brought up a really good couple of good real points that his support system that he has in place. That's phenomenal. That's what we like to hear coming from Blue Help and coming from an organization that strives to help people move beyond this and become more resilient. This is one of those things. Steven's dealing with the new normal. This is his new normal, right? He's not going to be able to go back and be the guy he was before. He is going to continually push forward through it. He's going to continually deal with it, and he's got his friends and his families to help him do that. But on a daily basis, we can expect to deal with not just ourselves, but think about the public. I mean, I think the last numbers that were out there were either 60 or 80 million contacts law enforcement makes a year. So, of those, how many of those are dealing with other individuals that are having uh, mental health issues? Quite a few. It's not an overwhelming number, but yet it is a number that it's large enough that we've had to take on additional training to help us deal with this. But Steve's story and Stephen's story and my story are very paralleled. Even though he made it perfectly clear he didn't pull a trigger or anything, his aftermath and what he's had to deal with is very similar. And like him, I have an excellent support system. I have an awesome wife, a good son that, he comes in and talks to me about the shooting. He was only one when I got shot. So uh, those things make all the difference in the world when it comes to helping move past those mental health crisis that we deal with and that the general public deals with.
And we talked about it in, I think, the first episode of number of contacts. And, from a law enforcement standpoint, I think we're up to about 700,000 officers that are,
Right.
probably full time as well as part time around the country. And I gave a number of 50 million because what I wanted to do is I wanted a low end number,
Sure.
just to say that, it could be more, it could be less, but this is a safe number. We were talking about it was officer involved shootings and kind of the percentage chance that it would occur, and it's extremely low. But we deal with that in law enforcement quite a bit. But then when you think about EMS and fire, I mean, they're going to every car crash. They're going to, they're ripping cars open to pull parts of bodies out. They're going to train wrecks. They're going to really traumatic scenes all the time. And
Absolutely, yes.
I don't have any experience with firefighters or EMS or kind of that side of the spectrum, but I can feel it. I can know what they're going through, or at least understand what they're going through, and I can only imagine what they're seeing. People that they literally are bringing in and dying right next to them on a daily basis, almost, depending on where you
Sure.
work.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, TJ, if you think about back to your time when you were in law enforcement, and Stephen, the same thing with you, running as an MP, a lot of times we were on scene after fire or after EMS. So by the time we get there, what are we doing? We're directing traffic. We're and
Doing a
not to say that
report, collecting information.
or
Yeah.
collecting information
Hmm.
or doing what cops do.
Hmm.
Sometimes we get there and we actually have to go in and help people. We may have to put on that tourniquet. We may have to help extract somebody with somebody else who's deceased next to them. But for the majority of the time, that's your other first responders, that's your lawn or your firefighter guys. I've
That's
talked
right.
with many. I've talked with many uh, EMTs, paramedics. They lose patients on the way to the hospital, or they transport somebody that they know is not going to make it. And they may do that. I knew one paramedic that transported, I think it was 4 young children that didn't make it in a week. That is just unbelievable for what the mind has to go through. And then when you think about, we talked a little bit about our shifts that we work. Those guys are 24 hours on. Now, sometimes they don't work a lot. We kid them a lot about, their hours sometimes, what they're doing, playing Xbox and all that. But sometimes these guys are really pumping it. Out of a 24-hour shift, they may be running 23 hours, right?
Right.
So put that on top of what they're seeing out there. Uh, from the worst part of it, from where they have to deal with, like you said, pulling somebody out of a vehicle who may already be gone, or removing body limbs, or something along that line, or that call that they get that, like we used to get, where we're like, I can't believe I got to go call again, like a cat in a tree or something along those lines. Those types of calls cause the same amount of stress, especially if they're already tired, if they've already been running call to call on traffic crashes or medical emergencies or whatever. These are the things that those guys, when they get that all in there and they're moving for such a long period of time, it just overwhelms the body and overwhelms the mind. And without an outlet, they're dealing with it just as much, if not more, than your military guys or your law enforcement guys.
Right. And then you
With
look at a small town. If you're a small town, small city, you're running around doing as paramedic work or firefighting, and the people you're coming in contact with, everybody. And so
Correct.
that person that does die, that's somebody you knew, you might have grew up with, you might have went to school with, that might be your neighbor. That's just such a different dynamic. I worked in Denver. It was a gigantic city. I ran into a lot of the same kind of criminals all the time, but um, it wasn't a whole lot of people that I knew, and I can't even imagine what that's like on a daily basis.
Those small
Imagine.
cities too, they have, a lot of volunteers, volunteer fire department, small police stations. So it is quite different, I would imagine.
Absolutely. And guys, along that line, that's an excellent point, TJ. Along that line, think about it this way too. What if we, as first responders, lose somebody in a small town? um, that just triples or quadruples the effect. If you're dealing with a small town, like I had to contact an agency today that literally had 6 officers. That's all they had. They had 6 officers and a chief. um, could you imagine the impact losing an officer to, say, suicide to an agency like that? It would just be disastrous. So yeah, I mean, you bring in that the small town concept versus like you worked with a thousand man agency. So if a guy in a district 3 or 4 districts away that you didn't know, it's going to affect you a lot different than if it's one of your guys in your own district.
Sure, absolutely. Like I said, you grew up with them, you know them. It's just
Yep.
such a different dynamic that I can't even fathom. I did DUIs for a while, for about 4 years, and we had a lady that worked with MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and she would come around and tell her story about how her daughter died, and there was a car accident, and her daughter was kind of head on hit by the drunk driver, and she
Mhm.
tells her story that she's driving through traffic, and just so happens that she's there when it happens, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm a nurse. I can come help." And she runs up there, and it's her daughter that actually died. And
Oh
so
my goodness.
she goes up there and she's helping her, and there's this massive trauma, and she just dies right there. But it's unbelievable just to think. Like I said, I don't run into the same people, and I've met one or two people that I've known in my life when I was working in law enforcement, and that's just because of the big city. But I can't even imagine what these small towns and small cities go through. And I can never say it enough, is that you've got to get out there. You've got to say something. You've got to, talk to people. And I highly recommend that if you're going through something personally, this is my recommendation. And Stephen, you might have a different one, but have an outside source too, somebody that's non-police related that you're able to talk to and kind of interact with, maybe even a best friend that's non-law enforcement, just something that gives you a little bit of an out sometimes. And maybe you can tell them a little bit of stuff. You probably can't go into a lot of details and you can't talk cop with them, but at least give them something to unload a little bit. I think is helpful, even if you won't go in and talk to somebody, a professional.
Right. And I know, a lot of us have hobbies, right? So obviously, my hobby is gaming. I get on the golf course every now and then and play some golf, but being able to have, gaming community or golf community, if you play flag football with some buddies, break away from that and get into a completely different environment is what helps me the most. It's easy for me to jump on my computer and just have a conversation with TJ and just, if I want to tell a story, sometimes it just comes naturally and it's not forced. It's just like, you know what, maybe I just needed to get that off my chest. Maybe I just needed to talk about it. I actually never talked about it to anybody. Maybe that can happen for anybody on the golf course, if you play tennis or if you just go fishing, and just
Yeah,
have that community, that person that you just, you can open up to, is extremely important.
for me, it was fishing and kayaking. That was kind of my out. It's obviously kind of a seasonal thing. So, gaming. We've been gaming since, I don't know, at least 10 years now. I think,
Yeah,
between me and
about
you.
10 years.
So yeah, so we've been. That's kind of my out as well. Is get in there and just run around and be able to just play different games and get kind of frustration out. And I think that's helpful. Stephen, Huff, I don't know if you have recommendations or thoughts on different things people could do to kind of unload. Maybe if they don't want to talk to a professional, but they need to unload a little bit. do you have any recommendations or suggestions or anything like that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the biggest people, I should say, not person, but people that actually helped me through helped me through several rough patches, and have helped many other first responders is the chaplaincy program. I'm not going to push religion, and they don't push religion, but they are an excellent source to go to if you want that somebody else to talk to. The chaplains at the sheriff's office where I worked when I had my shooting, they would come by the house. Almost it was seemed like it was at least twice a month for at least a the first year or the second year that afterwards after the shooting. So you got your chaplaincies that you can go to within your agencies. You have the ability obviously to go out and seek professional help if you want. I would be very careful with that. I can tell you from personal experience, and probably Stephen and probably you, TJ, you guys could speak to this as well. Not all counselors or psychiatrists are cut out to deal with what we deal with. So sometimes you're going to have to shop around until you find that right one that you can actually go sit down and feel comfortable with talking with. And then, of course, the other thing is going back to what Stephen said earlier, is that big support system that you have. I had plenty of other friends and family that I could talk to if something was bothering me, if I was dealing with those anger issues, or if I was dealing with just kind of wanting to withdraw from everybody. You know, these people could see it, they could sense it, they would come talk to me, or I would go talk to them. So there's plenty of other things, just like you guys have mentioned, uh, getting out of the 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 profession and doing something else is going to open you up to allow you to speak to other people about it. Sometimes it just comes without expecting it. And sometimes you're like, I just really need to talk to somebody about it. So there's all kinds of different ways you can go about finding individuals that are going to help you. And if for nothing else, just listen, because a lot of times that's exactly what it is just listening.
Mhm. Yeah, and so I did seek out help in my kind of incident or my story. I'll go into that just kind of briefly, but for me, again, I'm working in a large city. Every weekend, it's shootings and stabbings and car chases, and I mean, I think I was number two in the city, the entire city for pursuits. You know, I was the second highest person in the department. So when I say I've seen a lot, I've seen a lot. Got into probably three or four different situations where I was standing next to someone that fired. So I was kind of involved in a lot of that stuff. Saw a lot of bodies, saw a lot of car crashes, a lot of just heinous stuff. But this story is not any of that, and it hit me the hardest. And I went to a neighborhood. It was just, you know, your middle to upper class neighborhood, nice cars, nice houses, probably $500,000 houses. And it was a call of a person down in the house that was not breathing, and they needed help. And I was actually pretty close, so I was the first one to arrive before fire and EMS. I go inside, and when I get downstairs, I see two kids sitting on a couch, and I go into a bedroom because they're kind of pointing towards there. Dad is in the bedroom, and on the floor is a 15, 16-year-old kid, and he's doing CPR on the kid. And I get to talking after all this is kind of said and done to get the story of what actually occurred, because it's kind of strange. He's going he's going at it, then fire EMS shows up, they take over, so it wasn't the kind of thing where I needed to take over. He was doing it really well. And I got to talking to dad, I got to talking to the kids, and this is again a 15, 16-year-old kid. He took some drugs. He offered the drugs to the other kids. They didn't want it. They were having a sleepover, and something happened with the drugs that just caused him to stop breathing. And He was feeling sick. He went and laid down. The kids left him alone in the bedroom, came back, and they found him. And he was cold. He wasn't breathing. He had clearly died for probably a half hour or more before Dad was able to get in and intervene. And Dad was torn up. He couldn't believe it. This kid's friend, had come over their house and died. He literally died in the bed to one of the children in their bedroom. And it was just such a traumatic scene for that family. And for me, it wasn't anything. It wasn't like a big deal at the time. I looked at the kid. It's a young kid. I at the time had a young son, and so it didn't hit me until later, kind of when I was getting ready to go home, and I finally went home. And the first thing I did is I raced inside and I hugged my son, and I was just so happy to see him. And then a day went by, a couple days go by, and I started having these dreams and nightmares where I'm seeing this kid's face, and it was just affecting me so strongly, and it was bothering me so much. Like I would look at somebody and I would see his face on that person, another kid, just another teenager on the street or whatever. And it was just wild, and it just bothered me so much. I went in and talked to somebody, and my department at the time had a unique system. I think it was unique in the sense that you go in, there's a very set location. It's a specific practice. You can go in, say, hey, I want to talk to somebody. They generate like a unique ID number for you, but they don't take down your name, they don't take down your information, and then they bill the department. And this is something that they offered to the first responder as well as the family members. So if the family members wanted to come in, and I sat down, and I probably went 3 or 4 times in total to discuss this incident, and felt so much better afterwards. Again, it was such a minor thing. I've seen bodies. I had people bleed out in front of me. I had gone to car crashes where they rolled the car and they're half in, half out of the car, and they're missing limbs. And the thing that bothered me the most was the kid that stopped breathing. And my story mirrors Kilo Steven in the sense that it wasn't such a big deal, but it was for me. And it ended up being on a personal level. And I think compounded by the fact that I had a son, and right now he's at a sleepover. So I'm like, please don't do any of this stuff, because this is the stuff I've seen. But I can only imagine what that father that was doing the CPR, and he was trying so hard. He was trying so hard, and he's just going and okay, fire's here. I don't want to stop. Got to keep going. Got to keep going. He wanted to save this kid, and he couldn't. And I can only imagine what he's gone through, the kids have gone through, and ultimately that family of that son have gone through. And, for me, it just hit me on a weird level. And I'm sure you've seen that a
Like
lot. Go ahead.
I was about to say, it's like Stephen Huff said, it seems minor, but it is that last little drop of water in that bucket that just makes the biggest difference.
And
As EMS and fire and police officers, the bucket just doesn't get filled instantly, not normally. I mean, it probably could happen, I'm sure, if you got traumatized from something so bad, but it's just little drop here, little drop there, little drop there. And after so many years of just drop, 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 I mean, you basically got a flood.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. TJ, if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question
Sure.
about that last thing you were talking about. Number one, you'll be happy to know that at least within the law enforcement community, and I'm sure within other communities of fire and EMS, a lot of agencies are picking up on that. And what they're doing is they're setting up off-site places um, for their officers and their first responders to go to be able to talk without having to worry about the ever-present command staff or administration, getting in their personal business. So that's a good thing. That's one of the things that is really starting to evolve now. We're starting to see that legislation come out where the FBI is now going to be tasked with tracking suicides and those kinds of things. But the real thing I wanted to ask you, or the interesting thing that you said, number one, kudos to going and actually talking to somebody. But what was the time frame between the incident and you actually saying, "Okay, I need to go talk to somebody"? How long was that? Would you say?
I want to say it was about a week. It was a couple days, about a week at
So
most.
fairly quick,
Right.
fairly quick.
Hmm.
Okay, and that's one of the big things that that we push for. I know after the shooting I was involved in, all of the other members who were there, we were a very tight knit unit. We worked with the marshals task forces. We tracked gangs and sex offenders and served warrants. That was pretty much our job, right? So we were a pretty tight knit group. Those guys immediately went into a debriefing within 24 hours of the shooting. Okay, and
Hmm.
that is one of the big things that we try to push. um, Officers are really good about compartmentalizing, and first responders in general, right? Anybody who holds a job, military guys and gals, anybody that holds that kind of position where we are in control, and then after we're done dealing with that, we just kind of shove it away. So one of the big things that we've learned is if you will start speaking about it, and Steven said that, he talks about it and he feels better. For the longest time, I was actually going around to different agencies and talking about the shooting. Well, what I found was that night I wouldn't sleep, right? So I'd go do a talk, I wouldn't sleep. Uh, but in the following days, I felt better. I wasn't as tense, my shoulders dropped, my mind was more clear. So much like Steven, I learned quickly that, hey, I need to keep this up. Even though it causes a little bit in the beginning, right after I get done talking about it, it's got that emotional trauma to it. Afterwards, in the long run, it's good. And that's very interesting and like I said, kudos, because a lot of officers would put that away until it manifested itself to a point where um, you would almost have to seek professional help, right? I know you went to your counselors and whatnot, but they were able to get it under control, and you were able to get it under control and then push forward through it.
Right. And you look at some major traumas and things like that that ultimately may require medications or, a long
Yes.
stint where you have to stay overnight or a week or whatever it is. And, let's be real. I was big, bad, tough guy. And for me, I didn't like to talk to people. And so
Yep.
um, I can't say it enough is you've got to go. You've got to talk to somebody if you're struggling. And when I look back at this poll, it kills me that it's 77% of 45 people said they've struggled and they didn't go get help. And it's there, there's options, there's resources. And yes, it feels weird. Yes, it sucks to go in and open yourself up and say, all right, I'm going to tell you about something that's bothering me, even though I'm a tough guy. But
Right.
you've got to do it, and you've got to clear that bucket out. You've got to let it out and work through it and get back to, again, you said it earlier, much earlier in the episode, is that you'll never get back to the way you were before that incident, but at least you
Correct.
can get manageable and closer to that so that you can do what you need to do.
Absolutely. And one of the things, and all of us, I think, uh, Stephen and you and me, and hopefully, and I know our listeners out there that are listening tonight can relate, is when you lose control, and then when you are not in control of the situation, and then you still have to go out there and be in control of other situations. That's just compounding, right? I can tell you for myself, I went through 30 surgeries. I was out of work for a year. And in that time frame, I learned real quick that people don't stop relying on you. If they know you're the police, or if they know you're an MP, or they know you're a firefighter or paramedic or EMT, they're still going to look at you as somebody that is in a position of authority and control, even though you may not be. I mean, I learned very quickly that I still had to help people, even though I needed help myself. So it was a very interesting, a very delicate balancing act to go to the store and have people look at you like they would look at me like I was a dead man walking, and then you would literally have to put your Superman suit back on, even though that my jaw was wired shut and I had a trach in my throat, and I'd have to, hey, everything's okay, and just pat them and write notes to them, and once I saw they were okay, then I would then leave and deal with what I had to deal with, because sometimes it really kind of made me mad, and that was just part of that coming out of it and getting through it. So getting out there and talking to anybody, depend just it doesn't matter as long as somebody is willing to listen and you're willing to talk about it. That is going to be one of the biggest things, that and quickly, like you did. We know that usually within the first 72 hours, if we start discussing these incidents that cause us trauma, especially mental trauma, that we know we have a better chance. The percentages go way up that we will not have residual problems later on, such as PTSD or PTS. Uh, if we just break that shell and come out of that stigma of being that tough guy and having that machismo, coming out and saying, okay, look, this is bothering me. I'm having nightmares at night. I can't sleep. I'm locking myself in a bedroom, keeping away from the family. I get angry at nothing. And you start talking these things out. The mind will start to finally release. And that's where we start to see that recovery.
Brought all that stuff up, and I was thinking, like, for me personally, and I imagine with a lot of other people, is that the hardest part is opening up. The hardest part is taking that first step to go
Yeah.
in and talk to somebody. Once you start that process, me speaking from experience, once I started that process, it was simple. It was literally me just telling someone how I'm feeling, and then they'll
Yeah.
go ahead and well, how do you feel about this? How do you do this? And then maybe they'll try some different techniques, and there's different things that are done nowadays. But the first step, the biggest hurdle, the most challenging thing of the whole process is just going in to say something. Once it
Absolutely.
happens,
Right.
I feel like no matter who you are, whether you're the big tough guy, whether you're quiet, you keep to yourself, whatever you are, whatever level you are, I feel like once you start doing that, you're gonna feel you're gonna be able to continue with the process. You're gonna be able to speak. You're gonna be able to talk about emotions. You're gonna be able to have everything relate, and then ultimately the end goal is you start to heal.
And
Right.
that's it. Amen.
Yeah.
And so,
I know.
good.
I know. I want to let people know, if you're listening, if you have, maybe you're a civilian with no EMS experience, you're not a police officer, you're a lawyer or whatever, and you have one of these guys that do such a tough job, and you're out doing whatever, and they start to open up, let them. Just let them, and just listen.
Yeah, encourage.
That's kind of that kind of is what happened to me. It was very random, with almost like a random person, because sometimes I just tell stories to tell stories. But if I'm comfortable and I'm just doing something, and it just comes for no reason, and just maybe I needed to talk to somebody. But if you're not that person that's talking, then listen. It's super important. Just listen. you know uh, it, Normally these guys tell really good stories, but more importantly, most likely they needed to get something off their chest, and it just happened to.
Exactly.
Yep.
I, I've
Absolutely right.
yep, I've
I
been
mean,
that
that's
ear many times.
yep. And guys, it's listening to both of you guys talk about it. I mean, you guys are, um, for lack of a better term, you guys have been there, done that. So you understand. Hey, look, all you got to do is crack that faucet, right? If you crack that faucet, that water is going to come out.
Hmm.
And just like TJ said, man, you open it just that little bit that first time, and it's going to suck the first time you do it. But after that, you're going to notice, and then you're going to be more apt to open that faucet up a little bit, let a little bit more out, and a little bit more out. You know, Steven's absolutely right. He said, people just sometimes people start talking to you, and like Steven, I'm sure he gets, or at the very least he used to get, I'm sure he still does. Hey man, what was it like over in Afghanistan, and what was it like doing tours over there? And you tell those stories, and sooner or later, as you progress in your healing, those stories are less painful to talk about. Are they still going to suck? Yeah, absolutely, they're going to suck. But the more you discuss it and the more you let more water out, the better you're going to feel. And TJ hit it best, man. Once you do it one time, it's like the floodgates open. And then some guys and gals are not going to be like that. It may take several times, but the fact of taking that first step and actually talking to somebody, whether it be your brother, whether it be your wife, whether it be your chaplain, whether it be a counselor or a psychiatrist. Heck, I went through 3 and 4 of each before I found the right ones that got me on the right track. So just find that person to be able to talk to, and as long as they're listening, it just it's it's a it's a phenomenal feeling to know once it comes off and you wake up the next day and it's like a different person. So without a doubt, I mean, you guys have walked the walk and you're talking the talk. So
And I think I left that first kind of session where I felt crummy, having just talked about it. But, and you may feel that way. You may feel maybe even completely worse than when you went in that first time, and that first, maybe a few minutes or an hour later or whatever it is, all those emotions are coming back, all that stuff, because
yep,
you're constantly trying to hide it. You're constantly trying to bury it. And so now you've brought it up and you've told somebody, and so maybe a little while you'll feel bad, but I felt so much better. And I can tell this story now, and I'm feeling okay telling this story. I'm not like, wouldn't say I was healed. I'm perfect. I'll never be the same again. But
right.
to me, it's just, it felt so much better. When I was done, there was one day where I went in and they're like, all right, so I mean, to me, it sounds like you're good. You're feeling. Are you? How are you feeling? And I'm good. And so we left that last session where I felt like I had accomplished what I wanted to accomplish by going in there, and I felt better. And Stephen Hough, I don't know if you want to talk about kind of what you went through and give us a few minutes on that. I do have a couple questions in the chat that I want to cover, but I'll wait till after that, and then
You
we'll talk resources and things like that. But do you want to tell us about what happened with you and maybe how it affected you?
Absolutely. Yeah, no problems at all. December 9th, 2011, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's about how I remember it. So we were uh, my four partners that worked with us. I worked out with an agency in Northwest Florida, and our job was just like we talked about earlier. We worked with the Marshals Task Force. We served warrants on bad guys, real bad guys. Um, and we tracked down gang members. We did sex offenders. We served general warrants for the agency. We were actually serving a warrant for the task force on a guy that had pretty much planned out how he was going to kill cops. It was to the point where the people he was selling meth to were calling the cops, going, "Hey, watch out for this guy. He's gonna try and kill one of you guys." So when we tracked him down in a house, we waited till we got a search warrant. Literally, we were probably an hour away from going in the house with the SWAT team. He came out. He had 2 pistols in his hand. Myself and one of my partners was at the front of the house. He came at us shooting. We shot at him. He wound up shooting me in the face and twice in the leg. I wound up shooting him, from which he later died. And then, of course, from there, I went to the hospital. It took, like I said, about 30 surgeries. I was out of work for a year with some reconstructive stuff. And And then after that, I mean, that's where about a month or two into that is where things started to click, and we started to understand what post traumatic stress was like, or um, not being able to. For me, it was a little bit more difficult because I couldn't talk about it. Right, I was knocked out for probably the first 3 or 4 days when they were doing the initial surgeries to remove um, skull fragments and all kinds of good stuff. So uh, that's when I started feeling it. My partner started feeling it when he was driving back and forth from the hospital to his house and back. He would start having panic attacks. I had panic attacks in the hospital, which later continued on at the house. And then it just went from there, just cascaded. I mean, it just literally went into fully what you expect and what you hear. Memory issues, anger issues, just pulling away from everybody, being withdrawn. Um, and it took a lot of work. It took all of us getting together. We literally would debrief every day for about the first 2 months. We would talk about the shooting. I took my wife back to the actual uh, crime scene, if you will, where the shooting took place and the incident took place. We looked at the bullet holes in the house. There was a whole bunch that we did to further our healing as a family, as individuals. So, that's just the the short 5 minute version of it. So,
Sure.
shoot with your questions.
Well, so before I get into the questions specifically, what kind of resources does Blue Help have? What do you
Okay.
recommend? Let's cover those and just talk about those real quick if we can.
Well, immediately, if we get an officer that calls in or an individual that calls in and says, "Hey, I need help," obviously we're going to send them to either a suicide prevention, a 1-800 number like Safe Call Now, or the National Suicide Hotline or Prevention Center. However, what we really like to do is if those officers contact us, what we want to do is we want to put them in touch with kind of like what I was going back and talking about earlier. If we can, and we've been very successful with this in the fact that we've been able to say, okay, you live in, let's say, Vermont. Okay, so we know of a counselor in Vermont that deals specifically with law enforcement. So we will try and put you in a place or match you up with someone in your area to you that you could go talk to. So we have a couple of resources on the website. If you go to the training and resources, we have a lot of books on there. We also have National Alliance to Mental Health. They have resources within their website that help out officer safety and wellness through IACP, the Chiefs of Police Association. There's plenty of different places that Blue Help will try and get you connected with. But when you first contact us, we're going to try and put you in contact with somebody who's close to you because immediate help is understood. However, if it's going to be, we want to get you in a good place to where we can get you to somebody close by that can actually sit down with you instead of talking over a phone or instead of talking via Zoom or something along those lines.
So, say if an officer knows of another officer, or EMS, or you know whatever position they're in, they know someone who needs help, or they themselves need help. What is the best way for them to reach out to your organization, or how do they go
All
about
right.
that process?
So one of the things that we do offer is we have another site and it's firsthelp.net. And if you want, I'll put that. You want me to type that in or anything, or you want to
Uh,
get that
yeah, I
after
think I
we
can actually
approve?
pull it up. I'll put it on stream here.
Okay. And
I
it's
saw it.
1sthelp.net. So if you go there and you can see that it's going to try and do exactly what we were talking about. It's going to try and match you with somebody in your immediate area, either a counselor or a 1-800 number or other individuals, maybe a SISM team, a critical incident stress management team, something along those lines. We're going to put you somewhere where you can get help. This is completely anonymous. It's not reported anywhere. It's not tracked by us anywhere. So nobody knows that you're putting in this information. So you go through the questionnaire. You tell us where you're at, what kind of symptoms you're having, what you're experiencing, and then we just go from there.
And I did that as you were talking, and it asks, I think, 7 different questions.
You
Says,
got it.
what do you want to do? Do you want inpatient, outpatient? Do you want, are you needing immediate help? Or are you able, is it something that isn't immediate? And then now I'm at a screen. It says search results, and it shows there's a place in Denver, Aurora, Lakewood, Eaton, Colorado, Rio Ranch, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then it's just showing distances from the zip code that I put in, which is Denver. So
Right.
that's pretty amazing. That's pretty quick to do.
Yeah, and the other thing is, keep in mind too, we don't track it, but we know when you guys enter this information. So Karen has been phenomenal with reaching out to individuals, and she's an excellent talker. So she will actually reach out to individuals and talk with them, make sure they're okay, and follow up, do some follow ups with them if they provide us that information to where we can follow up with them. So it's unique. I don't know of any other sites out there quite like this one. There's some other ones that are close to it, but none that are really quite like that. So it's just that this is the biggest thing that we can do to offer to our first responder community to say, hey, look, if you need it, this is what we're going to do to help you get it.
Sure. And like I said, it was really easy. I did it on stream. Obviously, the listeners who are on listening to Spotify or Anchor or wherever we're showing up, they can't see what I'm doing. But if you go to our YouTube channel and you watch the video, you can see what I just went through. If you want to actually see the screen and see the questions that they ask, it's really not invasive. It was
Right.
literally, do you need help right now? Yes, no. Do you need help for anxiety, depression? And I had a list of things, and you click which ones apply to you. Next screen, and it was pretty quick to do
Yes.
that. And I got a bunch of different people that can help me afterwards. And then you
You got
talked
it.
Yeah,
earlier. Go ahead.
I think it's important that, it kind of is quick, because when you're thinking, man, I need help, you can easily talk yourself out of it. And it's just like
Mm-hmm.
when you have a person that makes that split decision, like, yep, today's the day, I need help. Somebody told me about this website, I'm just going to go to it. You don't want to have, all right, here's this 16 million long survey that you got to take. Like, they're going to get halfway done and go, you know what, I feel better by now, I'll do this another time.
Too
And
many
that's what you
hoops.
don't want.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep, too many hoops.
Not to mention putting that personal information out there, right? You
Right.
don't want people to know it's you that needs help. So, and we get that, it's anonymous, and it's there to help anybody who is in need. So, I mean, this isn't just for law enforcement, as you saw. I mean, when you see where it asks you what type of what your profession is, it
Mm-hmm.
has all of our first responders on there. It doesn't just have law enforcement. We got corrections, we got communications officers, we've got everybody on there. So, it's a great tool. It's a quick tool, and it gets you that information like within seconds of you
Mm-hmm.
completing everything, and then you've got a path that you can follow to hopefully find someone that is going to fit your needs.
And then you talked earlier about the not immediate need for help, that you do have kind of a peer support, local person that they can talk to. One of the questions in the chat was, how does someone get involved with this organization? So whether it be for that purpose to be kind of a peer support, or whether it's to help the organization or to donate or whatever it is, how do people help Blue Help if they want to get
All right.
involved?
All right. So first thing I'm going to tell you is we have a lot of individuals that like to volunteer. So the simplest thing to do, if that's something that you would like to do and volunteer, whether it be, we've had people that have come out of the woodwork sponsoring walks, right? Suicide prevention walks.
Hmm.
Or whether it be you want to help with working on the database, because we have a database of over 1,200 officers that have committed suicide going all the way back to 1956 that we've had reported. So, if you want to help with that, there's so many different things that people can help with as far as a volunteer. Of course, if you want to donate, it's all you've got to do is go to the Blue Help website. Pardon me. Hit get involved. Scroll down to the bottom where it says donate, and we'll be very appreciative of your donations. Um,
Got
we
that screen
get
up right now, just showing that
There
there's
you
a
go.
little button on the website, and you can just click on it and take it right there.
You got it. You got it. So there's any number of ways. One of the big things I always say, and I always say it. This is probably my third or fourth interview or podcast that I've done. One of the biggest things people can do is just walk up to your first responder, walk up to that military guy, walk up to that uh, paramedic or EMT, and just say, "Hey, thank you. We know it's tough. We appreciate you being here." And that will do more for somebody, for an officer, especially in today's climate where, let's face it, first responders in general are getting a bad rap. This is one of those things that I always encourage people to do. Hey, go out there and thank them. I went to a restaurant the other day with my family, and literally four people tried to pay for my dinner. And it's those are the kind of things that really will help our first responders in that moment. That feeling of being needed and appreciated.
Hmm.
But as far as Blue Help, there's so many different ways. Just getting the word out. Share the link on your social media. That's huge for us. Social media is where we live at. So uh,
And so, for the purpose
any
of the podcast, we will include all those links, the
excellent.
Blue Help and the other website with the questionnaire. We'll include those with the video to YouTube, and we'll include it with the description of the podcast episode in audio form as well. So,
And the other thing I wanted to say real quick too is that if the individual that's asking the questions, or if anybody out there who's listening that we have working for other agencies, ask if your agency has a critical incident stress management team, right? This is something that some of your larger agencies have been doing this for years and years. Your smaller agencies, maybe not so much.
mhm.
Sometimes they have them, sometimes they don't. So this is one of those things that is critical, especially when an officer finally decides to say, "Hey, I need to talk." This is something that you could put together and get the assistance they need immediately until the agency as a whole or that individual can get to whomever they want to talk to. So, critical incident management teams on agencies, either fire, EMS. I mean, fire's been doing it for decades, but law enforcement is just now coming into that. So,
Mhm.
if you want to join one of those, talk with the folks at your agency, see if there's a policy for it, and see what the training is. Usually about a 16-24 hour training as far as how to run a debriefing, and then from there it's just a matter of getting out there and helping our first responders.
Great. Just want to close this podcast episode. I'm showing a screen now. It's from the Blue Help website, and it's talking about the stigma just in numbers, and the need, and the you've got to go get help. I'm looking at 2016, 17, 18, 19, and this year, the number of suicides, and it is staggering when you look at it. 143, 172, 174, and then last year, the most listed in this list, 228. Right now, we're at
And that
125, and that is 125 too much.
absolutely, and that number uh, and keep in mind, the guys, these numbers are fluid. So uh, the actual number for last year is already up to 234. It's up to
Mhm.
235, somewhere in there. So these numbers are going to keep growing. Not to say that more officers are committing suicide or more first responders are, but I think this is a sign that the stigma is finally uh, reached a pinnacle where people are like, enough's enough, and it's time to
Mhm.
talk. So we firmly believe those numbers, especially from last year, are people stepping up and saying, "Hey, look, this is no good. I know." We know that this guy had problems. He didn't get the help he needed, and he took that final step, which is what we don't want. But keep those numbers. We encourage people to report them because this is the way we keep it on that front line to where we go, hey, look, when we got more officers dying of suicide than we do of felonious assaults, we've got a problem. And
Absolutely.
that's the one thing that I would encourage folks to do is make sure that they get reported.
And another thing, again, we are all first responders kind of podcast. I've got a kind of image up on my screen now. It's up live for those that are viewing the video. It's suicide rates among firefighters and police officers, and it shows that roughly 18 per 100,000 firefighters. And I don't know how accurate this is, but they said as of 2018 study in 2019 in March, it says 18 firefighters per 100,000, 17 officers per 100,000, and that's just too much at this point. And we need, if you need help, if you need to talk to somebody, if you need to do something and you're struggling, don't be that 77% that was in my Twitter poll. Go seek help, talk to somebody, and want to say, I want to guarantee, I can't guarantee it, but I want to, that you're going to feel better afterwards, but at least give it a try. And it doesn't matter how tough you are. It doesn't matter that you're the state champion in Krav Maga or MMA or whatever it is. Just go in and try it. Just if it's just one day, if it's 1 week, if it's a month, whatever it is, multiple sessions, go in and try it. That's all I can say, and I
Sure.
can't say it enough. And I don't know, Kilo, Stephen, if you want to touch on that a little bit, we're going to close out here shortly, and then Stephen, Hough, if we'll let you kind of give some closing kind of statements if you want to, and we'll go from there.
I mean, you you got to. I mean, you have to. You have to talk to somebody. And I just want to kind of double back and just remind people, if you're the person that one of these guys is talking to, just be quiet and just listen. Just listen to what they have to say. They might not even tell you ever that it changed their life or that it helped them in any way, but I can almost promise you that it will. It helps more than you would realize.
Absolutely.
Well said, Stephen. And as a matter of fact, that is a perfect segue for me to say, that is one of our campaigns. Hashtag I will listen, right? Nothing could be greater or assist someone in need than just putting your hand on their back and just sitting there and letting them tell their story and tell what they need to tell in order for them to get those rocks out of that bag or empty that bucket of water. So TJ is absolutely correct. It may not happen on the first time. Uh, this may be something that takes days, months, years until you finally start to progress to a point where you're like, okay, I got this. And that resiliency starts building up and you're starting to be able to tackle those things that are really hurting you inside. But the bottom line is it's not going to start until you take that first step, until you take the initial pardon me again, until you take that initial um, opportunity to talk to your spouse or talk to your friends or talk to a counselor or talk to your priest or uh, your guy that you work with on the street, your partner on the street. You've got to be able to move beyond the I'm in control, I will keep it together, because sometimes we just can't. And the biggest thing is just get out there and find someone that you can talk to.
Absolutely. Stephen, I want to thank you for coming in. This is we're a new podcast. We're 3 episodes in. We've had this conversation, myself and Stephen Kilo, that this we're going to be doing this until the internet doesn't work. And
Gotcha.
this for us, this is amazing. This is fun. This is entertaining. This is something we feel we need to do. This episode was the most impactful that we've done. It's the most powerful that I personally feel. That was the most powerful episode we've done. The content, the things that you said, the things that Blue Help offers is just staggering and amazing. And I just want to see that number one of these years for law enforcement, for first responder suicides to be 0. And
Absolutely.
maybe it'll never happen, but I want it to happen, and we got to try. We got to try to get to that point. So thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. I greatly appreciate it. I apologize that we're kind of an hour and almost 30 minutes in, but this is such an important topic. This is such important information that I told you when we started, we may go a little over, and we just have to. And
Absolutely.
thank you for hanging in there and being with us.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. And guys, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention. We talked about this offline for just a second. As we get more information, we'll get it to you. But we've just been able to start that park in Texas. That is for all first responders. So Blue Help has initially targeted itself for law enforcement and corrections guys, but we definitely feel the need for all of our first responders, all of our military. So
And that
don't
park
think
again
that
what was the name of it again?
What's that now?
What was the name of that park again, just for listeners?
What the park is? Well, it's still it just got released, so I want to make sure I don't want to put
Break any rules.
Yeah, I don't want to put anything out there just yet on it.
Okay.
But I want to tell you guys that the park is coming. We have the plan set for it. We have our monument set for it.
Nice.
There's some things that we're still working on with it, but we're ready to launch and start putting things together for it. But the biggest thing is to for our listeners, for your listeners out there, is hey man, we're here for everyone. We're Blue
Absolutely.
Help. We're Blue Help, but Blue Help doesn't just mean law enforcement. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you again for coming in. We'll go ahead and shift you out, and if you want to hang out, I'll have a chat with you afterwards. But greatly appreciate you coming in, and look forward if you get that information on the park and everything. If you want to send that to me, I will plaster it all over Twitter, and I will plaster it all over the podcast and let everybody know in a future episode that information. So greatly appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Have a good one. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and end the episode. Powerful. Stephen?
Super powerful. Man, it was great. And it was so informative, like to me, and I'm one of the hosts. Like it's just crazy. It was crazy good. Loved it.
Yeah, that was, we'll have other guests on, but I don't know how powerful we can have of a guest like that because of the content, because of the information, the stories, the personal experiences. That was pretty amazing. So thanks for being here. As always, we will go ahead and cut out of here. I will upload the video to YouTube. Everybody will have an opportunity to watch the video, and please do, because the screen cuts over and you can actually see the stuff that I went through on the website, and I showed Blue Help's website and everything. So that's definitely a beneficial aspect to the podcast, is that we do a video recording. It's not just an audio podcast. There's a visual element. There's an interaction. And eventually we'll get Stephen, on video, and you'll be able to see his cool mug, and we'll be able to be talking heads back and forth. And, we're getting there. We're getting there. But yeah, take a look at the YouTube channel. You can find all that information on the Twitch channel, or you can find it on our Twitter account, which is Defending the LN for line, Defending the Line. And just absolutely amazing. I appreciate you guys being here. We'll go ahead and get out of here, and we'll look forward
I'd like
to
to say
seeing.
one more.
Yep, go
I'd like
ahead.
to say one more thing. We want your guys' feedback. So, if you have any suggestions, if you just want to chat, make sure you jump in the Discord or hit, TJ up on Twitter or me up on Twitter or Defending the Line on Twitter. Reach us somehow. We'd love to talk to you.
Absolutely. We want your comments. We want your interaction. We had one person in chat on Twitch that was actually interacting with us and asking questions. We want that. So please come in when we're live into the Twitch. You can join us there. Come into the Discord. We can talk to you live, your voice, pull you up in the channel, just like we did with Stephen Hough, and get you in there to ask questions to the guests or ask questions to us. And we want that interaction. And even if it's just something like, hey, your microphone level was too low or whatever, you want to give us feedback afterwards, technical feedback. That's perfectly fine too. We want to hear from you, so it doesn't matter what it is. But I greatly appreciate everybody listening. Thank you. If you're listening to us on Spotify or Anchor, I greatly appreciate you listening there as well. And we'll catch you on the next one on episode 4, which is next Friday, 10 p.m. Eastern. Thanks again.